If you give birth to another daughter, then it's over between us. You and your girls will leave my house for good. I won't tolerate another useless mouth to feed." His words stung Munachi like a slap to the face. She was stunned by his harshness. She had always known that Nkem longed for a son, but she never imagined he would consider abandoning her if she failed to give him one. In the peaceful village of Agbo, there lived a man named Nkem. He was known throughout the village as a hardworking and successful farmer. Nkem owned one of the largest crop farms in Agbo, and his farm was the pride of the village. He grew everything from yams to cassava, maize to vegetables. Every planting season, Nkem's farm was always filled with the greenest and healthiest crops. And during the harvest season, his barns were full to the brim. He was a man who knew the value of hard work, and he put all his energy into making sure his farm thrived. Nkem was not only known for his farming skills, he was also respected for his wisdom and kindness. He was a well-titled man in the village, holding the title of Ozo, which was given to him because of his contributions to the community and his upright character. The people of Agbo often went to Nkem for advice, and he never turned anyone away. He was always ready to help others, whether it was giving advice on farming, helping with village matters, or even lending a hand to those in need. Despite his success and the respect he commanded, Nkem was a humble man. He lived a simple life in a comfortable home he built in the heart of the village. He was in his 30s when he decided it was time to get married. Nkem believed that every man needed a good woman by his side, someone to share his life with, to support him, and to build a family together. There was no shortage of women in Agbo who admired Nkem and wished to be his wife. But Nkem had always had his eyes on one woman, Munachi. Munachi was a charming and grateful woman who was well loved in the village. She was not just beautiful, she was also kind-hearted and respectful. Munachi always greeted her elders with a smile and a respectful bow. She was known for her gentle nature, and everyone in the village adored her. Munachi came from a good family, and her parents were friends with Nkem's parents. The two families had known each other for years, and there was no objection from either side when Nkem decided to marry Munachi. In fact, both families were overjoyed when they heard about the marriage plans. It seemed like the perfect match. Nkem approached Munachi's family with gifts and a proposal of marriage. According to the tradition of Agbo, the man had to show his seriousness by bringing gifts to the woman's family. Nkem brought everything required: kegs of palm wine, yam tubers, clothes, and other valuable items. Munachi's family was very pleased and accepted Nkem's proposal with joy. The marriage ceremony was a grand event in the village. People came from far and wide to witness the union of Nkem and Munachi. There was singing, dancing, and plenty of food and drinks. The village elders blessed the couple, wishing them a long and happy life together. Nkem and Munachi stood side by side, looking so happy and in love. The whole village came to see how perfect they were for each other. After the wedding, Munachi moved into Nkem's home, and they began their life together as husband and wife. Nkem was overjoyed to have Munachi by his side. She was everything he had hoped for in a wife and more. Munachi was not just a wife, she was a partner. She understood the value of hard work, just like Nkem. She didn't mind getting her hands dirty on the farm, helping Nkem with planting and harvesting. Together, they worked side by side, making sure the farm continued to prosper. Every morning, Nkem and Munachi would wake up early to start their day. They would first pray together, thanking God for their lives, their farm and their marriage. Then, they would have breakfast, usually a simple meal of yam and vegetables, before heading out to the farm. Nkem, should I help with the weeding today, or do you want me to check on the yams? Munachi would ask as they walked to the farm. You can help with the weeding, my dear. Nkem would reply with a smile. I will take care of the yams. Together, we will finish the work in no time. And so, they would spend their day working together, talking and laughing as they worked. Nkem admired how hardworking and dedicated Munachi was. She never complained, even when the work was tough. Instead, she would sing while she worked, and her sweet voice made the work seem easier. In the evenings, after a long day of work, Nkem and Munachi would return home, tired but happy. They would sit together in the courtyard, enjoying the cool evening breeze and talking about their day. Sometimes, they would talk about their future, dreaming of the children they would have and the life they would build together. I'm so happy to have you as my wife, Munachi. Nkem would often say, you have made my life complete. And I'm happy to be your wife, Nkem. Munachi would reply, her eyes shining with love. You are a good man, and I'm proud to be by your side. Their marriage was not just a union of two people, it was a partnership. They supported each other in everything they did. Munachi was always there to encourage Nkem, and Nkem was always there to protect and provide for Munachi. They were truly a perfect match. The people of Agbo admired the couple and often spoke about how well they complemented each other. There was no doubt that Nkem and Munachi were meant to be together. They had the blessing of both their families and the support of the entire village. Even the elders would say, this is a marriage that will last. Nkem and Munachi are like two halves of the same whole. As time went on, Nkem's farm continued to prosper and he became even more successful. But despite his growing wealth, Nkem remained humble. He never forgot where he came from or the people who helped him along the way. He continued to help others in the village, sharing his knowledge and resources with those in need. Munachi, his beloved wife, was by his side through it all. Together, they worked hard and together, they enjoyed the fruit of their labor. Their marriage was strong, built on love, respect, and mutual understanding. The couple's home was a place of peace and joy, where laughter was often heard and love was always felt. As time went by, the villagers began to wonder when Nkem and Munachi would start a family. In Agbo, as in many other places, it was expected that after a couple got married, they would soon have children. Nkem and Munachi were no exception. They too looked forward to the day they would welcome a child into their home. Nkem, I can't wait to hold a baby in my arms. Munachi would often say with a smile, her eyes filled with hope and excitement. Neither can I, my dear, Nkem would reply, placing his hand gently on Munachi's. Our child will be a blessing to us. They both dreamed of the day when they would become parents. They talked about what they would name their child, how they would raise them, and the values they would teach. Nkem often imagined teaching his son how to farm, just as his father had taught him. He looked forward to the day when he could pass on his knowledge and legacy to the next generation. One bright morning, Munachi came to Nkem with the news he had been waiting for. "Nkem, Nkem," she called out, her voice filled with joy. Nkem was in the barn, arranging some yams when he heard his wife's voice. He quickly wiped his hands and rushed out to meet her. "What is it, Munachi?" Nkem asked, a bit concerned by the excitement in her voice. Munachi could hardly contain her happiness. With a broad smile on her face, she said, "Nkem, I am with a child." For a moment, Nkem stood still, trying to take in what Munachi had just said. Then, as the words sank in, his face broke into a wide grin. He lifted Munachi off the ground and spun her around in joy. "This is a wonderful news, my dear," Nkem exclaimed, his heart filled with happiness. "We are going to be parents." Munachi laughed as Nkem spun her around, her own joy matching his. "Yes, Nkem, we are going to be parents." From that day on, Nkem and Munachi prepared eagerly for the arrival of their child. Munachi continued to help on the farm, though Nkem insisted she take it easy and not overwork herself. He made sure she ate well and rested often, wanting nothing but the best for his wife and their unborn child. As the months passed, Munachi's belly grew, and so did their excitement. The entire village of Agbo shared in their joy. The women of the village often visited Munachi, bringing her gifts and offering her advice on how to care for herself and the baby. "Munachi, make sure you eat plenty of fruits and vegetables," one of the women advised. "It will keep both you and the baby healthy. And don't forget to rest, Munachi," another woman added. "You need to be strong for the baby." Munachi thanked them all with a warm smile. She appreciated their care and concern, and she followed their advice closely. She wanted to do everything right for the sake of her baby. As time drew near for the baby to be born, Nkem couldn't help but wonder whether they would have a boy or a girl. In his heart, he hoped for a son. He imagined teaching his son how to farm, how to be a strong and responsible man. But at the same time, he knew that whether the baby was a boy or a girl, he would love the child deeply. One cool evening, as Nkem and Munachi sat together outside their home, watching the sun set over the village, Munachi spoke up. "Nkem, what do you think our baby will be? A boy or a girl?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. Nkem smiled and replied, "Honestly, Munachi, I don't know. But whatever our baby is, boy or girl, I will love them with all my heart." Munachi smiled, content with his answer. "I know you will, Nkem. You will be a wonderful father." And so, the day finally came when Munachi went into labor. Nkem was by her side, holding her hand and comforting her. The village midwives came to assist with the birth, and after several hours of labor, a healthy baby girl was born. "It is a girl," one of the midwives announced, handing the baby to Munachi. Munachi held her daughter close, tears of joy streaming down her face. Nkem looked at his daughter, his heart swelling with pride and love. "She is beautiful," Nkem whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "She looks just like you, Munachi." Munachi smiled up at Nkem. "She is our precious Amarachi," she said softly, naming their daughter. The news of Amarachi's birth spread quickly throughout the village, and soon everyone was talking about Nkem and Munachi's new baby. Nkem was overjoyed to be a father, and though a part of him had hoped for a son, he was deeply in love with his little girl. In the days that followed, Nkem couldn't stop bragging about his daughter. Amarachi is the most beautiful baby in the world. He would say to anyone who would listen, she is a blessing to our family. His friends would laugh and agree, happy for Nkem and his growing family. No one mentioned the fact that Amarachi was a girl instead of a boy. In the village of Agbo, children were seen as blessings, regardless of whether they were boys or girls. Soon, it was time for Amarachi's naming ceremony. A special event that Nkem and Munachi had been looking forward to. They invited everyone in the village, family, friends, and well-wishers. The day was filled with joy and celebration. Nkem made sure that everything was perfect for the ceremony. He arranged for the best musicians to play, and there was plenty of food and drinks for everyone. The village square was decorated with colorful clothes and flowers, and the atmosphere was filled with laughter and music. During the ceremony, Nkem stood proudly as the elders blessed his daughter and gave her the name Amarachi, which meant God's grace. As the ceremony continued, Nkem couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride and happiness. He looked around at all the smiling faces, the dancing, and the joyful celebration, and he knew that this was a moment he would treasure forever. After the ceremony, the celebration continued with music, dancing, and feasting. Nkem's friends congratulated him and teased him about having a daughter. So, Nkem, when will the next one come? We're expecting a boy next time. One of his friends joked, laughing as he patted Nkem on the back. Nkem laughed along with them, not taking the teasing to heart. Don't worry, my friend. Nkem replied with a smile. The next one will be a boy, but for now, I am more than happy with my beautiful daughter. Munachi, holding Amarachi in her arms, watched as Nkem interacted with his friends. She felt blessed to have such a loving husband and a beautiful daughter. She knew that their family would continue to grow, and she looked forward to the future with hope and excitement. As the sun set on the day of Amarachi's naming ceremony, Nkem and Munachi sat together in their home, reflecting on the day's event. Amarachi was fast asleep in her crib, and the house was filled with a sense of peace and contentment. Nkem, today was a wonderful day, Munachi said softly, leaning against him. Yes, it was, Nkem agreed, wrapping his arm around her. I am so grateful for our daughter Munachi. She is the best gift we could have ever received. And I am grateful for you, Nkem, Munachi replied. You are a wonderful husband and father. Nkem smiled and kissed Munachi's forehead. And you are a wonderful wife and mother. Together we'll raise our daughter with love and care, and our family will continue to be blessed. And so, with their heart full of love and gratitude, Nkem and Munachi looked forward to the future, knowing that their journey as parents had only just begun. The village of Agbo would continue to watch over them, supporting and celebrating with them as their family grew. And in the years to come, there would be many more moments of joy, love, and togetherness in the home of Nkem and Munachi. 3 years had passed since the birth of Amarachi, and the home of Nkem and Munachi was filled with laughter and love. Amarachi was a joyful child, always curious and full of energy. She had her mother's smile and her father's bright eyes. Nkem loved his daughter so much, but as time went on, he began to feel the pressure of having a son. In the village of Agbo, having a male child was seen as important, especially for a man like Nkem, who had become a titled man. The villagers expected him to produce an heir, someone who would carry on his name and legacy. Nkem himself believed that having a son was necessary to secure his place as a respected man in the community. Nkem, When are you going to give us a son? His friends would tease him whenever they gathered. Amarachi is a beautiful child, but you need a son to carry on your name, the elders would say, their voices filled with the weight of tradition. Nkem would smile politely, but inside, the words stung. He couldn't help but think about it constantly. Every day, the pressure grew, and it became harder for him to ignore the whispers in the village. Why doesn't Nkem have a son yet? The villagers would murmur among themselves. What kind of man can produce an heir? These remarks echoed everywhere in the market, in the fields, during village gatherings. The whispers became louder with each passing year, and Nkem began to feel as if everyone was watching him and judging him. Munachi noticed the change in her husband. He was no longer the cheerful, easygoing man she had married. He became withdrawn, spending more time alone and less time with her and Amarachi. She could see the weight of the villagers' expectations pressing down on him, but she didn't know how to ease his burden. One evening, after a long day of work, Nkem sat outside their home, staring at the stars. Munachi joined him, sitting quietly by his side. Nkem, what's troubling you? She asked gently, placing her hand on his. Nkem sighed, not meeting her eyes. Munachi, I feel like I'm failing as a man. Everyone expects me to have a son, but all I have given them is a daughter. Munachi frowned. Nkem, Amarachi is not just a daughter. She is our child, our blessing. You know how much she loves you. Nkem shook his head. It's not that I don't love her, Munachi. I do. But the village expects me to have a son, and I don't want to let them down. I don't want them to think I'm less of a man. Munachi squeezed his hand, trying to reassure him. Nkem, you are not less of a man because you have a daughter. You are a wonderful father, and Amarachi adores you. The villagers will talk, but that doesn't change who you are. But Nkem couldn't shake the feeling of inadequacy. The pressure continued to build, and he became more distant with each passing day. Munachi, ever patient, bore the brunt of his mood swings, but never complained. She knew how much this meant to him, and she didn't want to add to his worries. Then one day, Munachi came to Nkem with news that she hoped would lift his spirit. Nkem, I have something to tell you, she said, her voice filled with excitement. Nkem looked up from where he was sitting, his expression tired. What is it, Munachi? Munachi smiled and took his hand. I'm with a child again, Nkem. For a moment, Nkem didn't react. He simply stared at her, his thoughts racing. Then, a flicker of hope appeared in his eyes. Are you sure? He asked, his voice filled with both hope and anxiety. Munachi nodded. Yes, Nkem, I'm sure. We are going to have another child. Nkem's heart leaped with joy, but almost immediately the anxiety set in. This was his chance to have a son, to secure his legacy, to finally prove to the villagers that he was a man. But what if it wasn't a boy? What if this child turned out to be another daughter? As the months passed, Nkem became increasingly anxious. He prayed fervently for his son, offering sacrifices and visiting the shrine to ask the gods for a male child. His desperation grew with each passing day, and he found himself distancing from Munachi and Amarachi. Munachi noticed the change again. Nkem no longer spent time with Amarachi, and he barely spoke to her. His mind was consumed with thoughts of the unborn child. He had convinced himself that this pregnancy was his last hope, and he couldn't bear the thought of it not being a son. Nkem, please don't worry so much. Monachi said one evening as they prepared for bed, "Whatever this child is, boy or girl, we will love them just the same." But Nkem couldn't be comforted. "Monachi, you don't understand. I need a son. The villagers, they expect it. I can't face them if this child isn't a boy." Monachi's heart ached for her husband. She could see how much this was affecting him, but she didn't know how to help. She tried to reassure him, to remind him that their love for their children was what mattered most. But Nkem was too consumed by his fears. The months dragged on, and Nkem's distance from his family grew. He avoided spending time with Amarachi, afraid to get too attached to the new child in case it wasn't the son he so desperately wanted. Monachi, though hurt by Nkem's behavior, remained patient and understanding. One day, as Monachi was tending to the garden, Amarachi ran up to her, her small hands clutching a flower she had picked. "Look, Mama, I found a pretty flower for you," Amarachi said, her face beaming with pride. Monachi smiled and took the flower from her daughter. "Thank you, my sweet girl. It's beautiful just like you." Amarachi giggled and hugged her mother. "Mama, when will I have a baby brother or sister to play with?" Monachi's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Soon, my dear, very soon." "Will Papa be happy when the baby comes?" Amarachi asked innocently. Monachi's heart ached at the question. She didn't know how to answer. "Yes, Amarachi, Papa will be happy," she said, though her voice lacked the confidence she wished it had. As the days passed, the village's whispers grew louder. "Will Nkem finally have a son?" they asked each other. The pressure weighed heavily on them, driving him into a deeper bout of anger and frustration. He snapped at Monachi for small things, his patience wearing thin. Monachi, ever patient and loving, bore the brunt of Nkem's mood swings but never complained. She knew that his behavior was driven by fear and anxiety, not malice. She hoped that once the baby was born, things would return to normal. "Nkem, please, don't distance yourself from us," Monachi pleaded one evening as they sat together. "Amarachi misses you, and I do too. We need you, no matter what happens." Nkem looked away, unable to face his wife's pleading eyes. "I'm sorry, Monachi," he said quietly, "but I can't help it. This is our last chance. If this child isn't a boy." Monachi placed a hand on his arm, trying to comfort him. "Nkem, please remember that our love for our children is what matters. Be it boy or girl, this child will be a blessing to us." But Nkem's heart was heavy with fear. He couldn't shake the feeling that his entire identity as a man was tied to the gender of his unborn child. The whispers of the villagers haunted him, and he couldn't bear the thought of facing them if this child wasn't a son. The tension in their home grew with each passing day. Monachi did her best to keep the peace, but Nkem's distance was like a shadow over their lives. Even Amarachi noticed the change in her father. She didn't understand why he no longer played with her or told her stories like he used to. "Why is Papa always so sad?" Amarachi asked one evening as Monachi tucked her into bed. Monachi kissed her daughter's forehead and smiled sadly. "Papa is just worried, my dear. But don't worry, he loves you very much." "Will Papa be happy again when the baby comes?" Amarachi asked, her eyes wide with innocence. Monachi nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was telling the truth. "Yes, Amarachi, Papa will be happy again." As Amarachi left her daughter's room that night, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of worry. She knew that the outcome of this pregnancy would change everything, for better or for worse. She prayed that Nkem would find peace no matter what the future held. And so, as the months passed, Nkem and Munachi waited anxiously for the day their second child would be born. The weight of the villagers' expectations hung over them like a dark cloud, and Nkem's desperation for a son grew stronger with each passing day. The day had finally arrived, and Munachi knew the time had come for her second child to be born. Nkem was by her side, but there was an anxious silence between them. His hands were clenched tightly, and his face was drawn with tension. Munachi could see the worry in his eyes, though he tried to hide it. The villagers had been talking, and Nkem's desire for a son had grown even more desperate. As the midwife guided Munachi through the labor, Nkem paced back and forth outside their home, his heart pounding. He couldn't sit still. His mind was racing with thoughts of what was to come. He prayed silently, asking the gods to bless him with a son. He knew what the villagers would say if it wasn't. He didn't think he could bear the shame. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the midwife emerged with a small bundle wrapped in a cloth. She smiled and said softly, "Nkem, it's a girl. You have a beautiful baby girl." Nkem's heart sank. He felt as if the world had collapsed around him. The words echoed in his ears. "It's a girl." He stared at the tiny child, who was indeed adorable, with rosy cheeks and bright eyes. But he couldn't bring himself to smile. The disappointment was too heavy, and it was written all over his face. Munachi was exhausted from the labor. She held her newborn girl close, tears of joy and sadness mingling in her eyes. She could see the hurt in Nkem's expression, and it broke her heart. She had hoped that he would find joy in their new child, but instead, his face was clouded with disappointment. "Nkem," Munachi said softly, trying to reach out to him. "Look at our daughter. She's healthy and strong." But Nkem couldn't find it in himself to respond. He simply nodded, his eyes avoiding the baby. He mumbled something about needing to step outside and walked away, leaving Munachi alone with their newborn. As the days turned into weeks, Nkem's behavior towards his family began to change. He became distant, hardly speaking to Munachi or their two daughters. Amarachi, who had always been a cheerful child, noticed the difference in her father. He no longer played with her or told her stories like he used to. Instead, he seemed to avoid her, and when he did speak, it was often with irritation. "Nkem, is everything alright?" Munachi asked one evening. Nkem didn't look at her. "Everything is fine," he replied coldly. But Munachi knew better. She could feel the tension growing between them. Nkem was unhappy, and it was affecting everyone in the house. He started finding fault in everything Munachi did. If the food wasn't cooked just right, he would complain. If the house wasn't spotless, he would criticize. Even the sound of the girls playing would set him off. "Can't you keep them quiet?" Nkem snapped one afternoon when Amarachi and the baby were laughing together in the living room. "I can't think with all this noise." Munachi quickly hushed the girls, but the hurt in Amarachi's eyes was clear. She didn't understand why her father was always so angry now. The happy home she once knew was fading away, replaced by an uneasy silence that hung over them like a dark cloud. As time went on, Nkem's behavior became more troubling. When it was time to pay the school fees for the girls, he would make unreasonable excuses, saying the money was needed elsewhere or that the fees were too high. Munachi had to scrape together what little she could to ensure Amarachi continued her education. But it was becoming more and more difficult. "Nkem, we need to pay Amarachi's school fees," Munachi gently reminded him one evening. "Why should I waste my money on that?" Nkem retorted, his voice sharp. What good will it do? She's just a girl. Munachi's heart ached at his words, but she didn't argue. She knew that no matter what she did, it wouldn't change his mind. Nkem had become so consumed by his disappointment that he couldn't see the value in his daughters. He saw them as a burden rather than the blessings they were. The tension in the house grew thicker with each passing day. Munachi tried her best to keep the peace, but Nkem's anger was like a storm that could be unleashed at any moment. The girls were careful around him, tiptoeing through the house and speaking in hushed tones, afraid of provoking him. "Mama, why is Papa always so angry?" Amarachi asked again one day, her voice small and sad. Munachi knelt down and hugged her daughter tightly. "Papa is just going through a hard time. But don't worry, Mama is here for you, okay?" "But I miss the way he used to be," Amarachi whispered, tears filling her eyes. Munachi's heart broke for her daughter. She missed the way Nkem used to be too, the loving, caring husband and father who filled their home with laughter. But that man seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone who was consumed by bitterness and resentment. In the village, people began to notice the change in Nkem. They saw the way he walked with a heavy heart, his once proud shoulders slumped with the weight of his disappointment. The whispers started again, but this time, they were not just about his lack of a son. They were about the way he treated his family. "Have you seen the way Nkem is these days?" the woman at the market would say. "He is so angry all the time. It's like he's a different person." "He's no longer the man he used to be," added another woman. "He can't even take care of his own family properly." These words reached Nkem's ears, and they only deepened his frustration. In the village, a man's worth was measured by the sons he had, and Nkem had none. Despite his efforts to be a good husband and father, the villagers didn't see him as a true man because he had no son to carry on his name. One evening, after a particular harsh argument with Munachi over something trivial, Nkem stormed out of the house, unable to bear the sight of his family. He walked through the village, his mind swelling with anger and frustration. He could feel the villagers' eyes on him, judging him, whispering behind his back. "I'm not a failure," Nkem muttered to himself, clenching his fists. "I'm not." But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was failing. Failing as a husband, as a father, and as a man. He couldn't help but blame Munachi for it all. If only she had given him a son, everything would have been different. He wouldn't be the subject of ridicule. He wouldn't feel so lost. When Nkem returned home that night, the house was quiet. Munachi had put the girls to bed, and she was sitting alone in the living room. Her hands folded in her lap. She looked up as Nkem entered, her eyes filled with sadness. "Nkem," she began softly, "we can't go on like this. The girls are afraid of you. They don't understand why you are so angry all the time." Nkem looked away, his jaw tight. "I don't have a son, Munachi. Don't you see? I'm not a man in the eyes of the villagers. I have failed." "You haven't failed," Munachi replied, her voice trembling. "You have two beautiful daughters who love you. Isn't that enough?" Nkem shook his head, the frustration boiling over. "It's not enough. Don't you understand? I need a son to carry on my name, to prove that I'm a real man." Munachi felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She had cried too many times already. "Nkem, our daughters are just as important as any son would be. They need you. I need you." Please don't let this destroy our family. But Nkem was too consumed by his anger to hear her pleas. He stormed off to their bedroom, leaving Munachi alone with her thoughts. She sat there for a long time, staring at the empty room around her, wondering how they had come to this point. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. Nkem's bitterness only grew, and the home that had once been filled with love and laughter became a place of tension and fear. He constantly nagged Munachi, blaming her for not giving him a son. He took out his frustrations on the girls, finding fault in everything they did. "Mama, why doesn't Papa love us anymore?" Amarachi asked one day as she helped Munachi with the chores. Munachi paused, her heart aching at the question. She looked at her daughter, who was still so young and innocent, and forced a smile. "Papa loves you. He's just going through a difficult time, but we must be patient with him." Amarachi nodded, but the sadness in her eyes didn't fade. Munachi wished she could do more to protect her daughters from the pain Nkem was causing, but she felt powerless. All she could do was hold her family together as best as she could. Nkem, meanwhile, couldn't bring himself to leave Munachi. Despite his unhappiness, he wasn't ready to give up on having a son. He clung to hope that perhaps, if they tried again, they might finally have the boy he so desperately wanted. But for now, he kept Munachi and the girls in his house, though he was never truly happy with them. The once warm and loving home was now filled with an unsettling silence, broken only by the sharp words of an angry father. And as the days continued to pass, Munachi could only hope that one day Nkem could see the true value of the family he had before it was too late. Amarachi, who was already in school, continued to excel in education, her academic achievements surpassing even Munachi's highest hopes. Both Amarachi and her sister Chisom were not only at the top of their class, but were also respected by their teachers and peers. Although Amarachi was more advanced in her studies due to her age, both sisters were excelling at their respective levels, making their mother proud. Munachi watched with pride as her daughters blossomed into young women, their potential shining brightly despite the challenges they faced at home. When Amarachi finished primary school, she received a scholarship to attend a prestigious secondary school in a nearby town. This was an opportunity Munachi could ever have dreamed of affording. The scholarship filled Munachi with a mix of joy and anxiety. The thought of sending her daughter away from the village was daunting, but she knew it was the best chance Amarachi had at a brighter future. One evening, as they sat on the veranda, Munachi shared her thoughts with Amarachi. "My daughter," Munachi began, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "This scholarship is a blessing from God. You must go and make the most of it. But I will miss you so much." Amarachi nodded, her eyes filled with determination and a tough sadness. "Mama, I promise I will study hard and make you proud. I will always remember everything you have taught me." Chisom was sitting nearby, looked up at her sister with admiration. "I will work hard too, so I can get a scholarship like you, Amarachi. I want to make Mama proud as well." Munachi smiled at both of her daughters, feeling a deep sense of pride. "I know you will, Chisom. You both make me so proud every day." As the day of Amarachi's departure approached, Munachi made sure to prepare her daughter for the journey. She sewed extra clothes for her, packed her favorite snacks, and gave her a small Bible to keep with her. "This will protect you, my dear," Munachi said, handing the Bible to Amarachi. Amarachi took the Bible and held it close to her heart. "Thank you, Mama. I will keep it with me always." The day finally came for Amarachi to leave for her new school. The whole village seemed to gather to wish her well. As the bus arrived to take her to the town, Amarachi hugged her mother tightly. "I will miss you, Mama," she whispered. "I will miss you too, my daughter. Be strong and remember why you are doing this. For your future, for all of us." Munachi replied, her voice choked with emotion. Amarachi nodded, and with one last wave boarded the bus. As the bus drove away, Munachi wiped away her tears, already missing her daughter but knowing this was the right path for her. Life in the village continued for Munachi and Chisom. Chisom threw herself into her studies. Inspired by her sister's success, she worked hard, hoping to follow in Amarachi's footsteps. Munachi, though stretched thin by the demands of supporting her family, made sure to stay connected to her daughter's education. She visited Amarachi as often as she could, bringing her homemade meals and words of encouragement. The years that followed were a blur of hard work and determination for Munachi and her daughters. Amarachi thrived in her new school, quickly becoming one of the top students. She participated in various extracurricular activities, from debate clubs to science fairs, excelling in everything she did. Her teachers took notice and began mentoring her, encouraging her to apply for university scholarships. Back in the village, Chisom followed closely in her sister's footsteps. She too received praise from her teachers and soon became one of the top students in her class. Munachi's heart swelled with pride each time she received news of her daughter's accomplishment. However, amidst the joy of her daughter's success, Munachi's life took an unexpected turn. She discovered she was pregnant again. It was a surprise, and though a part of her was happy at the thought of a new life, she was also filled with fear. She knew how much Nkem wanted a son, and she dreaded his reaction if she gave birth to another daughter. When Munachi told Nkem about the pregnancy, he didn't say much. He simply looked at her and nodded, his expression unreadable. But a few days later, he called her to the sitting room one evening after dinner. Munachi sat down, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. Nkem's face was stern, and she could sense that whatever he was about to say wouldn't be good. Nkem looked at her coldly and said, "If you give birth to another daughter, then it's over between us. You and your girls will leave my house for good. I won't tolerate another useless mouth to feed." His words stung Munachi like a slap to the face. She was stunned by his harshness. She had always known that Nkem longed for a son, but she never imagined he would consider abandoning her if she failed to give him one. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she remained silent, knowing nothing she could say would change his mind. Nkem repeated his words in Igbo, the weight of them sinking even deeper into Munachi's heart. Munachi looked at her husband, tears streaming down her face, but she knew better than to argue. She simply nodded and stood up, retreating to the bedroom where she cried silently. The words Nkem had spoken played over and over in her mind. She was terrified, not only for herself, but for her daughters as well. What would become of them if Nkem made good on his threat? As the due date approached, the atmosphere in their home grew tense. Nkem rarely spoke to his wife, and when he did, it was only to remind her of the consequences if she didn't bear a son. Munachi prayed silently every night, hoping for a miracle that would keep her family together. In the quiet of her room, Munachi held her belly and whispered, "Please God, let it be a son. Let it be a son so that my family can stay together." She knew that whether the baby was a boy or girl, she would love it just the same. But the fear of losing her home and her daughters kept her up at night. Chisom noticed the change in her mother's mood and asked her one evening, "Mama, Are you okay? Ara Adekwagi, you seem worried. Munachi forced a smile and stroked her daughter's hair. I'm fine, my dear. Just a little tired, that's all. You focus on your studies, okay? Chisom nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She hugged her mother tightly before going to bed, hoping to give her some comfort. Days turned into weeks and the tension in the house only grew. Munachi could feel the weight of Nkem's expectation pressing down on her, and she struggled to find peace. Each day, she prayed for strength, for her daughters and for the unborn child she carried. As the time drew near for the baby to arrive, Munachi's fear grew. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: she would do whatever it took to protect her children, no matter the cost. As Munachi's due date approached, Nkem had taken drastic steps to ensure the birth of his son. He replaced the midwife Munachi had trusted for years with another one, who was recommended by his friend. He also made sure Munachi ate the best foods, believing that a special diet would help him finally get the son he longed for. The day arrived and Munachi went into labor. The house was filled with tension as Nkem paced back and forth. The hours seemed to stretch endlessly, and Nkem's anxiety soon turned into anger. He could barely sit still, his mind racing with thoughts of what would happen if his hopes were dashed again. Finally, the door to the delivery room creaked open. The midwife emerged, her face a mix of relief and hesitation. She looked at Nkem but avoided his gaze. "It is a girl," she announced softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Nkem felt as though the ground had been ripped from beneath him. His worst fears had come true. With a groan of frustration, he stormed into the room where Munachi lay on the bed, exhausted but holding the newborn girl in her arms. The sight that had once filled him with joy now filled him with disgust. Munachi looked up at him, her eyes pleading with hope and fear. "Nkem, please," she whispered. "She's our child, just like Amarachi and Chisom. She needs her father." But Nkem was beyond reason. "I told you, Munachi," he roared, his voice shaking with fury. "I told you, this would be the end if you gave me another daughter. How can I hold my head up in this village with 3 useless daughters?" Munachi, weak from childbirth, could only watch in horror as Nkem's anger exploded. She heard him packing his belongings in the next room, the sounds of drawers opening and slamming shut echoing through the small house. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the extent of his anger. He was serious about abandoning them. Moments later, Nkem returned, his face a mask of cold determination. "You and your daughters need to leave my house," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I don't want to see any of you here when I return." Munachi, holding the newborn close to her chest, tried to reason with him. "Please, Nkem, don't do this. We are your family. We need you." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. Nkem turned his back on her and walked out of the house, leaving Munachi sobbing helplessly on the bed. The pain in her heart was unbearable as she realized that he was not coming back. As Nkem walked through the village, he ignored the curious stares of the villagers. They whispered among themselves, but Nkem didn't care. He felt no guilt, only a bitter sense of failure. In his mind, Munachi had let him down, and now he had no choice but to start over. He needed a son, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get one, even if it meant abandoning the family he already had. Nkem's departure left Munachi and her daughters in a state of shock and despair. He had no choice but to return to her father's house with her newborn child. The journey back was somber, and Munachi's heart was heavy with sadness and uncertainty. When she arrived at her father's house, her father greeted her with concern and sympathy. "Munachi, what happened?" he asked, taking in the sight of his daughter and her children. Tears filled Munachi's eyes and she explained what had transpired. "Papa, Nkem left us. He said he couldn't stand having another daughter and told us to leave. I don't know what to do." Her father embraced her and said, "You and your daughters are always welcome here. We will figure this out together. You have always been strong, and I know you will get through this." Munachi nodded, grateful for her father's support. He settled back into her old room with her daughters, determined to make a new life for them despite the challenges they faced. Over the years, Munachi worked hard to provide for her family. She took on various jobs and worked tirelessly to ensure her daughters had what they needed. Amarachi continued to excel in her studies, and Chisom followed closely behind her. Munachi was proud of her daughters and did everything she could to support them. One day, Munachi received a letter from Amarachi, who had completed her secondary education and was now applying to universities. The letter was filled with excitement and hope. "Mama, I have been accepted into a university. I'm so excited and grateful for everything you have done for us. I promise to make you proud." Munachi read the letter with tears of joy. She felt a renewed sense of purpose and strength. Despite the hardships, her daughters were thriving, and that was a testament to her perseverance and love. Meanwhile, Nkem had moved on with his life. He found another woman, a woman who came from a wealthy family and was able to provide him with the social standing he desired. They got married, and Nkem hoped that this new marriage would be his chance to finally have the son he had always longed for. And that was how Munachi forgot him and focused on his girls. As the years passed, Munachi's daughter continued to grow and thrive. Both Amarachi and Chisom had secured scholarship to attend same university in the city. When the news arrived, Munachi's heart swelled with pride, but there was also a hint of sadness as she realized her daughters would be moving further away from home. The small village that had once felt like a prison now felt empty without them. Amarachi, the eldest, was the first to gain admission. She had always been a bright and diligent student, and her hard work paid off when she was accepted into the university's prestigious medical program. Chisom, determined to follow in her sister's footsteps, soon joined her at the university, pursuing a degree in engineering. Both sisters were filled with excitement and nervousness as they embarked on this new chapter in their lives. "Amarachi, Chisom, you both have made me so proud," Munachi said, hugging her daughters tightly before they left for the city. "Remember to stay focused on your studies and support each other." "Yes, Mama," Amarachi replied with a warm smile. "We'll make you proud." Chisom nodded eagerly. "We'll call you every week and visit as often as we can." Munachi smiled, though her heart ached at the thought of her daughters leaving. "I know you will. Just remember that no matter where you are, this will always be your home." With that, the sister left the village and headed for the city, where they quickly adapted to university life. Amarachi excelled in her medical studies, spending long hours in the library and laboratory, determined to become a doctor who could make a difference in people's lives. Her professors were impressed by her dedication, and she soon became one of the top students. Chisom too thrived in her engineering program. She was fascinated by machines and technology, always eager to learn more. She quickly established herself as a talented and hardworking student, impressing her professors with her innovative ideas and problem-solving skills. Despite the challenges of university life, the sisters remained close, supporting each other through difficult exams and late-night study sessions. They made new friends in the city, but their bond with each other and their connection to their mother remained strong. Back in the village, Munachi continued to work tirelessly. Adana, the youngest daughter, was now in secondary school and was following in her sister's footsteps. Though the house felt much quieter without Amarachi and Chisom's presence, Munachi took comfort in knowing that her daughters were pursuing their dreams. Mama, I miss Sister Marachi and Sister Chisom. Adana said one evening as she helped her mother prepare dinner. I miss them too, my dear, Munachi replied, smiling softly. But they are doing great things in the city. And you will too one day. Just keep studying hard. Adana nodded, her face full of determination. I will, Mama. I want to make you proud, just like Sister Marachi and Chisom. You already make me proud, Adana, Munachi said, pulling her daughter into a warm embrace. As the years passed, Amarachi and Chisom's success became a source of pride not just for Munachi, but for the entire village. People spoke of the two sisters, who had risen from humble beginnings to make a name for themselves in the city. They became role models for other young girls in the village, showing that with hard work and determination, anything was possible. Did you hear about Munachi's daughters? One of the villagers would say to another, they are doing so well in the city. Amarachi is going to be a doctor and Chisom becoming an engineer. It's amazing, another villager would reply. Munachi must be so proud of them. And indeed, Munachi was. Her heart swelled with pride every time she received a call from her daughters, hearing about their achievements and challenges. Mama, I passed my final exams, Amarachi exclaimed excitedly during one such call. I'm going to graduate at the top of my class. That's wonderful news, Amarachi, Munachi replied, tears of joy filling her eyes. I always knew you could do it. And Mama, Chisom added, her voice filled with excitement. I have been offered a job at one of the leading engineering firms in the city. They want me to start right after graduation. I'm so proud of you both, Munachi said, her voice thick with emotion. You have worked so hard, and now it's all paying off. After years of dedication and perseverance, Amarachi and Chisom graduated with honors. Amarachi secured a position at a prestigious hospital where she began her career as a doctor. Chisom, following closely behind, started her job at the engineering firm, where she quickly became known for her innovative ideas and hard work. Back in the village, Adana was also excelling in school. Inspired by her sister's success, Munachi's hard work and sacrifices had paid off, and she was finally beginning to see the fruits of her labor. One day, Amarachi and Chisom called their mother with exciting news. Mama, we have a surprise for you, Amarachi said, her voice filled with joy. A surprise? What is it? Munachi asked curiously. We have bought you a house in the city, Chisom revealed. It's a beautiful house and want you and Adana to come and stay here with us. Munachi was speechless. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she realized the extent of her daughter's love and gratitude. A house in the city? I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Mama, Amarachi said gently. You have done so much for us, and now it's our turn to take care of you. We want you to be comfortable and happy, Mama, Chisom added. You deserve it. Munachi could hardly believe it. The little girls she had raised with so much love and care had grown into strong, successful women who were now taking care of her. I'm so blessed, she whispered, her heart full of gratitude. A few weeks later, Munachi and Adana moved into the house her daughters had bought for her in the city. It was a beautiful home, filled with warmth and love. Amarachi and Chisom visited her often, and Adana was still in school, spent her holidays there. Nkem, on the other side, sat alone in his quiet house. The walls seemed to close in on him, making the large house feel cold and empty. Once, it had been filled with laughter, dreams, and the hope of having a son, but now, it was just a reminder of everything he had lost. He thought about the day he had left Munachi and their daughters. He had been so sure that a son would bring him happiness, but instead, it had led to his greatest sorrow. The son he had wanted so badly was gone, and so was the family he had abandoned. Nkem sighed deeply, his heart heavy with regret. The villagers talked about his daughters, Amarachi and Chisom, and how successful they were in the city. They spoke with pride about the girls, who had grown up to be smart and hardworking, making their mother Monachi proud. But every time Nkem heard their names, it felt like a knife in his heart, reminding him of the terrible mistake he had made. Nkem's health started to get worse. The guilt and loneliness weighed on him, making him weaker every day. He could feel his strength fading, but he refused help from the villagers. He didn't want anyone to see him in such a pitiful state. He was too ashamed of what he had done. One evening, as Nkem lay in bed, thoughts of Monachi and his daughters filled his mind. He wondered what their lives were like now. Were they happy? Did they ever think of him? He was proud of their success, but he also felt a deep sadness, knowing that he wasn't part of their lives anymore. Finally, Nkem decided he couldn't go on like this. He had to find his family and ask for their forgiveness. He knew he didn't deserve it, but he couldn't bear the thought of spending the rest of his life alone. He had to try, even if it meant humbling himself and facing the pain he had caused. The next morning, Nkem gathered his strength and began his journey to find Monachi and their daughters. His heart was heavy with regret, but he was determined to make things right. As he walked through the village, he asked people if they knew where his family had gone. Most of them didn't have much information, only knowing that they have moved to the city. Nkem approached an elderly man who had been a friend of his in the past. The old man looked at Nkem with sad eyes and said, "You should have never let them go, Nkem. You had a good family. Now you are trying to fix what's broken, but it may be too late." Nkem nodded, understanding the old man's words. He knew he had made a terrible mistake, but he had to try to fix it, even if it was too late. He continued his journey, feeling weaker with every step, but his determination kept him going. He arrived in the town where his daughters had attended secondary school. He went to the school hoping someone there could help him. The headmistress, a kind woman who had known Monachi and the girls, was surprised to see Nkem after all these years. "Nkem?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "What are you doing here? I haven't seen you in ages." Nkem hung his head, feeling the weight of his shame. "I have come to find my family," he said softly. "I need to ask for their forgiveness. Do you know where they are?" The headmistress looked at him with a mixture of pity and disappointment. "Your daughters were some of the brightest students we ever had," she said, her voice filled with pride. "Monachi did a wonderful job raising them. They have grown into remarkable young women. It's a shame you weren't there to see it." Nkem's heart ached at her words. He knew he had missed out on so much because of his pride. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I need to find them. I need to tell them how sorry I am." The headmistress sighed, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. She hesitated for a moment, then gave him the address where Monachi and the girls were last known to be living in the city. "I hope you are ready for whatever you find, Nkem," she said gently. "They have built a life without you." Nkem nodded, thanking her with tears in his eyes. He set out for the city the next day, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. The journey was long and difficult, especially for a man in his weakened state. But Nkem pushed on, driven by the need to make things right. When he finally arrived in the city, he was overwhelmed by the noise and crowds. The city was so different from the quiet village he had left behind. He felt lost in the hustle and bustle, but he kept moving forward, determined to find his family. At last, he reached the address the headmistress had given him. It was a modest apartment building, clean and well kept. Nkem stood outside, his heart racing. He was filled with anxiety, wondering how they would react when they saw him. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The sound echoed in the hallway, making his heart beat even faster. After what seemed like forever, the door opened and Nkem found himself face to face with Amarachi, his eldest daughter. "Father," Amarachi said in shock. her voice barely above a whisper. She hadn't seen him in years, and the sight of him now looking old and frail was a surprise. Nkem's eyes filled with tears. "Amarachi, my daughter," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I have been such a fool. I need to see your mother. I need to ask for her forgiveness." Amarachi was still processing the shock of seeing her father after so many years. She hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. "Come in," she said quietly. Nkem entered the living room where Chisom and Adanna were sitting. Both girls looked up in surprise, their expressions mirroring Amarachi's shock. They hadn't expected to see their father, and they didn't know what to say. Just then, Munachi walked in from the kitchen. She stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening in disbelief. The man who had abandoned her and her daughters, the man who had caused her so much pain, was now standing in her living room, looking broken and defeated. Munachi stood frozen in place, her heart pounding as she processed the sight of Nkem in her home. The man who had abandoned her and her daughters, who had left him to fend for themselves, was now standing before her, begging forgiveness. The emotion that surged within her were overwhelming, a mixture of anger, sorrow, and a long-buried love that she had thought had died years ago. Nkem, seeing the turmoil in Munachi's eyes, felt a deep sense of shame. He had expected this reaction, after all. He knew the pain he had caused. But standing there, facing the woman he had once loved and the daughters he had forsaken, he realized that the words he had rehearsed on the journey here were inadequate. No apology could ever truly make up for what he had done. "Munachi," Nkem began, his voice trembling with emotion, "I was a fool. I let my pride and my obsession with having a son blind me to what really mattered. I can see now that I was wrong, but I know that saying I'm sorry would never be enough to undo the hurt I have caused. I can't change the past, but I want you to know that I regret every decision that led us to this point." Amarachi, Chisom, and Adanna watched the exchange in silence. They had grown up without their father, and seeing him now so broken and remorseful was not something they had ever expected. The man standing before them was a shadow of the father they had known in their early years before he had turned away from them. Munachi finally found her voice, though it was shaky with emotion. "Nkem," she said, her voice calm but laced with pain, "You left us. You left me and our daughters to fend for ourselves. Do you have any idea what it was like for us? Do you know how hard it was to raise 3 daughters on my own? To see them grow up without their father because he didn't think they were good enough." Nkem felt the weight of her words like a physical blow. He had known, in the abstract, what he had done to his family, but hearing it from Munachi's lips made the reality of his actions all the more unbearable. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he struggled to hold them back. "I know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I know I was wrong. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But please, Munachi, I'm begging you to give me a chance to make things right, even if it's just a little. I don't expect you to take me back, but I want to be a part of your lives, even if it's from a distance. I just want to know my daughters again, to help in any way I can." Munachi looked at her daughters, searching their faces for any sign of how they felt about their father's sudden reappearance. Amarachi, always the most empathetic, seemed conflicted, torn between her anger and her desire to see her father redeemed. Chisom, who had always been the most practical, looked wary, as if she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Adanna, who had been too young to remember much about her father, looked curious but also cautious. Amarachi was the first to speak. "Father," she said softly, "we have built our lives without you. Mother has been everything to us. Our mother, our father, our protector. I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were, but I do believe in forgiveness. If you truly regret what you did, then I think we can find a way to forgive you." Chisom nodded in agreement, though her expression remained guarded. "I'm willing to give you a chance, father," she said, her voice measured. "But trust isn't something that is easily rebuilt. You hurt us, and that's going to take time for us to heal from that." Adana, still processing everything, remained silent, her wide eyes fixed on her father. She had grown up hearing stories of the man who had abandoned them, but seeing him now, she found it hard to reconcile those stories with the broken man standing before her. Munachi, seeing the willingness on her daughters to extend an olive branch, sighed deeply. "Nkem," she said, her voice steady now, "I can't forget what you did, and I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you. But for the sake of our daughters, I'm willing to try. I want to know what changed. Why did you leave your wife who gave you a son to come looking for the people you once called useless? Is it because you heard that my children are now successful?" Nkem lowered his gaze, unable to meet Munachi's piercing eyes. "It's a long story and sad story," he began, his voice heavy with regret. "After I got married to my second wife, we started living together and she gave birth to a son for me. I thought I had everything I ever wanted, but things changed after a few years. My son became so wayward, so uncontrollable. His mother, she wasn't the woman I thought she was. She started having an affair with another man, and when I found out, she didn't even try to deny it. She didn't care at all. Then I discovered that the son she gave me wasn't even my son. I drove them both out of my house, and that was when my illness started. Everything I thought I wanted, it all crumbled away." There was a heavy silence in the room as Nkem spoke. Munachi's expression softened slightly, but the pain in her eyes remained. Amarachi and Chisom exchanged glances, both trying to process their father's words. Amarachi was the first to speak. "Father," she said gently, "it sounds like you have been through a lot, but that doesn't erase what you did to us. You left us because we weren't what you wanted. We have learned to live without you. We don't need a father figure anymore, but we can forgive you and will help you with your illness." Munachi nodded in agreement with her daughter's words. "Nkem," she said, "we have moved on with our lives. We have forgiven you, but don't need you in our lives anymore. We will help you with your health, and if you ever need anything, we will send you money to support you, but that's all we can offer." Nkem felt a mix of emotions and gratitude, sadness, and a deep sense of loss. He had hoped for more, but he knew that he didn't deserve even this much. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you for forgiving me. I will never bother you again, but knowing that you have forgiven me is more than I deserve." Munachi nodded, her heart heavy. "Goodbye, Nkem," she said quietly. "Take care of yourself." And with that, Nkem turned and left the apartment, feeling the weight of his decisions more heavily than ever. He was grateful for the forgiveness he had received, but the knowledge that he had lost his family forever left him feeling empty as he made his way back to the village. He knew that this was the path he had chosen. His daughters had grown into remarkable young women without him, and now he would have to live with the consequences of his choices. Life continued for Munachi and her daughters. They had forgiven Nkem, but they knew that they didn't need him in their lives. They had built a strong, loving family together, and they would continue to support each other as they always had. Nkem, meanwhile, returned to his empty home, sad but grateful that at least his daughters had found it in their hearts to forgive him. The story teaches us about the importance of forgiveness. Nkem made a big mistake by leaving his family because he wanted a son. When he came back to ask for forgiveness, his family could have stayed angry, but instead, they decided to give him a second chance. This shows that even when someone hurts us deeply, it's important to forgive. Forgiveness helps us heal and move forward, even if we don't forget what happened. It also reminds us that people can change and that everyone deserves a chance to make things right. Thank you so much for watching this amazing story about Munachi and Nkem on African Stories. If you liked it and felt inspired with their journey, please show your support by clicking the like button sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.